Hey, dog people. Are you feeling stuck in your dog business? Overwhelmed, burnt out, and not sure how to grow? I created my brand new program, The Sustainable Dog Biz, for trainers just like you. Passionate about helping dogs, but ready for some clarity and systems that actually work. In this 4-week live program launching next year, I'll help you streamline your operations and fall in love with your dog biz all over again. Join the waitlist now for early access and bonuses. Visit www.thedogbizner.com/sustainable or click the link in the show notes and let's build the business you deserve. Welcome to Dog Training Bytes. The show where canine professionals share their key takeaways, big aha moments, and hardest lessons learned from working with dogs. I'm Mattison, certified dog trainer and behavior consultant, and dogs are my life. Every day I get to coach guardians and other trainers into a deeper understanding of canine behavior. But let's face it, sometimes dog training really bites. And that's okay, because when it does, we learn a lot. This podcast is all about sharing the lessons learned from experience, because the stories of when it got tough or when we made a mistake, that's when we learn the lessons worth learning. And it's time we share those with the world. I'll be talking to dog trainers and other pet professionals about times that working with dogs, well, bit. Not literally. Maybe literally. What's most important here on this show, what did they walk away with? What did they learn? How did it shape their approach today? Welcome to Dog Training Bytes, the show where pet professionals share personal lessons that you won't find in any textbook. Today, I'm speaking with Ashley Cipolletti. Ashley is the founder of Co-Regulated K-9s, a certified professional dog trainer, pet parent coach, and behavior consultant. She has a BA in psychology and animal-assisted psychotherapy and an MA in biology in progress, and Ashley's current research focuses on the co-evolution of humans and dogs. She brings over 15 years of experience in training animals, including horses, cats, and dogs, and has a decade-long background in the mental health industry. Ashley's work prioritizes the well-being of both humans and canines. Outside of training, she's dedicated to health and fitness, having healed from chronic illness through nutrition and lifestyle changes. Hey, Ashley, thank you so much for coming on. I am so excited for this one.
Hi, thank you. Me too. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I know you and I have chatted just a little bit about the importance of coming on to just share your experience and the value of helping people realize that they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much I feel like value in sharing vulnerable stories and making sure that they don't feel alone through that.
Yeah. And we study so much. There is a lot of textbook learning in dog training, but I compare it to dance. You can't fully learn to dance from a book. You have to do the work, and sometimes the work is tough. And sometimes the work is things that are thrown at us that we're maybe not ready or prepared for. And the learning comes from navigating through that anyway.
100%. Yeah, learning through the challenges, I feel is the best way to learn.
Yes. So can you tell the dog people out there about your personal dog or dogs? And me as well, because I don't know.
Yes, yes. So I share my life with Sadie. She's a 10-year-old husky mix, and I adopted her when she was about 2 or 3, and she's just been like the love of my life, so sweet. Now she's in her older years, so our relationship's shifting, and she's always teaching me how to be curious about kind of behavior changes and pain. But she is just so special and sweet, and she kickstarted my appreciation for more northern breed type dogs and liking dogs that act more like cat than caring to please you.
That is such a shift, I think, for people when they can start looking at their dog in a slightly different lens and seeing, maybe my dog does have a somewhat cat-like temperament. Maybe they don't want to be besties with a stranger the moment they come into the house.
Yeah, it makes you have to work for their love, and then when you have it, you're like, "Oh, this
It
is
feels
special, like,
so
it's sacred."
good. Yes,
Yeah,
yes. You feel really accomplished and validated in that moment.
exactly.
And it sounds like she is one of those just forever lessons where as you're evolving together, there's new lessons as you navigate each different phase of life.
Yeah, yeah, like, when I first got her, she wouldn't eat, and I was like, "How do we train a dog that won't eat, doesn't care about toys, doesn't care to please you?" And she just was
Huskies.
really anxious. Yeah, I was like, "I don't know what to do here," but I learned and definitely take that with me in my practice too. So she's been a wonderful teacher too.
I like what you said about how it's harder to earn, or it feels harder to earn the love and trust of dogs like that with that kind of temperament, but it feels so much more worth it, right? It feels like I
Oh
did it.
yeah.
I got through.
Yeah, when I got a really good recall, I was like, ha, all you haters out there.
Listen, that's a big deal. That's a
It
very,
was.
very big deal because huskies in general, and not just huskies and not all huskies, but there's not a lot that they value above the environment and above the world.
Exactly.
And so
Hmm.
finding ways to motivate and reinforce and communicate can be tricky.
I know. Now she's food obsessed, where I'm like, she loves shaping and she's been the best learner and teacher.
So it sounds like she was willing to meet you in the middle and
Yeah.
compromise and adjust herself as well.
Yeah, it's been really fun and special.
Oh, I am ready for the story, Ashley. I know we have some things to dig into, so let's dive in.
Yes. Yeah, so my story is really like a story about heartbreak and with an association with dogs under a 2-month period of time. And at the time I was living in Washington State. I worked at a humane society as their adoption program manager. And I was living with my ex-boyfriend now at the time, but it was right at the cusp of before a relationship ends, where you're just feels a little spicy, a little bit like fights are more common. So
Yeah.
my home environment was challenging, and then working in animal welfare, challenging, of course.
Yeah.
And I had an office dog at the time who she was in and out of the shelter her whole life. She was about 9 years old, and she had just every behavior challenge in the book you could have. And it started to also onset into physical symptoms where she was so stressed she couldn't sleep. So she was
Mm,
just pacing, panting, barking, drooling the whole night. It was
yeah.
bad. So we collectively voted on a decision for putting her quality of life top of mind. And it was a beautifully tragic and horrible and selfless and selfish decision to decide to do euthanasia for her, since she was in the shelter with no adoption inquiries, no foster parents. She tried to bite the one foster inquiry she had. So we made that decision. I was one of the only people there for that end of life moment with the vet tech. And it was the
Yeah.
first death I experienced in my life in front of me. And it felt like this mix of like shame and guilt and anger and sadness, but also like love. And I still stood by the decision. And it was just this beautifully intimate and raw and horrible moment. And it stuck with me for life. And I was grieving that incident pretty heavily, and also still having kind of chaos at home. And one of my coworkers suggested we bring in another office dog, because the office space is a hot commodity in a shelter setting, as a
Yeah.
resource. So we brought in another dog named Champ, who was a former street dog in Hawaii. And he was extremely fearful, also adopted a return several times. And me and him bonded through that grief. I felt like he really helped me just regulate myself through
Yeah.
missing my office dog. And he was so terrified, I helped him just feel more safe and comfortable. And first weekend I went home without him and had my office mates look after him. I came back and he destroyed the office. It's
Oh
like,
no.
yeah, it was like wires were chewed. There's pee and poop everywhere, blood everywhere, because they tried to put him in a crate and he broke out of the crate. It was bad. They were like, Ashley, can you like maybe take him on a shelter break next time you go on for a weekend? Because I was the only person who could walk him. He was so scared. And so I brought him home. He got along great with Sadie. It was supposed to just be a shelter break. And he ended up being a foster turned foster fail. And I taught him how to walk on leash, come in the house, sit on a couch, go upstairs, everything. But he was so fearful if someone looked at him, he peed himself and sprinted,
Mm,
and he
okay.
would just hide. So he was a huge flight risk.
How was
And
Sadie with bringing another dog into the home?
yeah, so normally she's not the best with other dogs, but she loved him. She does really well with street dog types. So
Okay.
this was like her, I was like, this, they got along really well. They had one or two scuffles, but we resolved it and they were good.
Yeah.
But she could come into her shell a little bit more because he was such a big personality. But overall, they did great. And yeah, and then when we were sharing our home with him, he was the kind of dog that would jump on the bed, off the bed, pace around. You couldn't really sleep that well. And if he was in a crate, he would scream, break out of the crate. It was just really challenging to live with him, but I loved him dearly. And he felt like a soulmate of a dog, like almost like an angel who helped me in a
Yeah.
really difficult time, but simultaneously a huge point of chaos as well.
Right,
It-
right.
Where I'd wake up and there it'd be like snowing from things he destroyed. I was like, what is it now? Like it
Oh
was
my
bad.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And long story short, and even I felt this effects of like our relationship chaos with how it affected the dogs and the dogs impacting the relationship chaos. It was this two-way street. And
Hmm.
it got to the point where I got so physically sick from stress that I felt like a dog and learned helplessness. I was like staring at a wall, shut down. I never had mental health issues prior, but it really started to impact that and felt like I couldn't even eat. I was so felt so sick.
It sounds like
And
baseline was so far away for all of you.
yeah, exactly.
Like
I was like,
returning to that baseline. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like everything in my life was just really stressful and associated with dogs as my healer and my point of stress.
Yeah.
And so eventually I worked with a therapist, thank God, and came to the conclusion that I needed to leave that situation. But it was really challenging. I didn't have a support system out there besides my therapist. I didn't have friends or family there. I didn't have a lot of finances because I worked at a shelter and I was living with someone in their house with their cars and all that, and with two kind of challenging dogs. So it's like, who's going to sign up to be my roommate with a dog that's going to destroy everything? And I
Yeah.
didn't have the heart to bring him back. So I worked through deciding to try to rehome him. And then the shame that comes with that from being a shelter worker was high. And I
Yeah.
got looks from volunteers about it, you name it. And it was also he was my soulmate dog. I was like, I don't want to have to rehome him, but I have to choose me first. And I
Yeah.
needed to live with a roommate and probably move to a city to find work that paid more. And so through that whole process, it was just again more grief, more heartbreak, and it really gave me empathy for pet parents that have gone through, just to bring it back to the beginning, behavioral euthanasia or living with a challenging dog or going through a life transition with dogs and then also rehoming a dog because you have to choose yourself first before you can care for anyone else. And so I ended up leaving and he stayed with my ex and I wrote this novel about how to take care of him. But he was a little scared of my ex because he's scared of men. So that was hard for me to leave him knowing he'd be struggling. But I had no other potential adopters and I didn't really have a choice. Yeah, I ended up doing that, moved to San Diego, and it took several years to heal from that experience. I think it's a lifelong process. And I think Champ's doing well. I've seen photos of him on the internet. He lives with other dogs now. He seems happy. And I just carry the story of him and the shelter dog that I had that he helped grieve through in the work that I do. And it really helped me connect the mind body connection and
Yeah.
understanding how me feeling emotionally sick or sad or helpless affected my physical body. And the two kind of fed into each other. And so now in the work that I do, I see behavior and I see training through this lens of there's the human side, the dog side, and the more animals and people in a home, the more complex it can get.
Yeah.
But that we have to work on having the human have the emotional capacity to step up and care for their dog and then help the dog kind of work through their emotions and feel like their welfare is improving enough before we even go into training. So that's really my style is like, how do we help them co-regulate, hence the name, of understanding the effects both of the dog and the human have on each other, on the mind, body, and I'd say even spirit, and work on healing that system and focusing less on training and more on that true like regulation and
Yeah.
capacity for stress.
It's a heavy focus on empowering of the human. I have a client right now. She said she had just like this realization this weekend. She has two dogs and they're both pretty reactive. And she said, when we're out, only two of the three of us can be freaking out. And it
Yeah.
can't be me. It can't be me because they're going to
Hmm.
be freaking out. So it can't be me. And it was just such a moment that I saw her decide that she was going to step up for her dogs. But that can only come after you've taken care of yourself. And it sounds like that was a major oxygen mask moment for you of I have to
Yeah.
put this on and take care of myself to be able to be the person that can show up and help people with their dogs.
Exactly. And I still feel that way where I have the awareness of what does it feel like in my own body if I'm stressed or if I have my own trigger stacking. I can't show up to a case with a really aggressive dog and a client that's going through a breakup and all this emotional heartache feeling dysregulated myself. So it's so important that I practice what I preach and do the things to feel my best, to have that emotional bandwidth to support a team going through a really challenging and potentially dangerous situations as well.
Yeah. And knowing how critical regulating is, right?
Mhm.
For dogs, because what we're really asking them When you really look at what we're asking dogs to do in the modern world, it is to
Mhm.
regulate very difficult within their nervous system and not at all what they've been genetically programmed to do. I'm going to quote somebody else in my life, but one of my
Yeah.
friends says, you can't give away what you don't have. You have
Mhm.
to learn how to regulate if you want to teach your dog how to regulate. And I think
Mhm.
that is one of the biggest challenges within like behavioral dog training is helping the human with their emotional regulation because it's hard. Hand up, I am a person who struggles to regulate. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's because what's in front of me is that hard to regulate from. Sometimes it has nothing to do with what's in that moment and everything to
Mhm.
do with what happened just before. And I think that by helping people know this experience, they can feel this in their body. I think it's beautiful, but also hard
Yeah.
to help people see that mirrored in their dogs. And when they realize their dog isn't just acting out of to be intentionally disobedient, your dog is experiencing inside what
Mhm.
you feel inside when you're not happy with the behaviors that you're putting out there in the world.
Right. Yeah. And we have these really high expectations of our dogs to emotionally regulate all of the time when we're not able to do that ourselves. And it's also adding to that the complexity. This is just from my master's perspective of what we evolved with dogs to do. We're like, we wanted dogs to bark at things, we wanted them to bark and lunge and chase prey off of agriculture and farms. It's so fascinating. And the very thing we wanted dogs to do for thousands of years is
It's a
now
real
causing
problem now.
problems. Yeah, and also to not discredit the owners now, it's like that can be dangerous, that it is affecting your well-being, and understanding and empathizing, like, where those behaviors come from in the dog. It's really fascinating to look at from so many different levels and factors and think about what can we change to really help people get those big wins, and I try and do that from little effort because I know people already have so much. I look for what is the easiest path or the path of least resistance with the biggest payoff for their stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, people just want to have an easy life with their dog. At the core of it, I think people just want to be able to move through the world with their dog with a little bit more ease than they do in general. And it's just the expectation, like you said, the expectation for them to behave in a way in which they were not created, in which they are not programmed. It's a high expectation. And when we're looking at behaviors, I think there's this disconnect of a behavior being like this one time isolated thing. And so
Mhm.
I've been going through this shift of reframing them for my clients as not a single behavior, not an isolated behavior, but it's a habit. It's a habit. And that's language that we as humans can understand. Like habits are going to the gym, it's a hard habit to make. Smoking is a hard habit to break. That's the type of behavioral pattern that we're working on in dogs. And I think there's been a lot of good and bad in terms of comparing dogs to
Mhm.
humans. And I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of like warnings of like, don't anthropomorphize, right? But if we do not get these concepts and frame them in a way that humans can understand them, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter.
Totally.
Not like we're
Totally.
talking about emotional regulation and the nervous system, and it doesn't matter unless we can make it mean something for humans. And to do that, we have to talk about the human experience.
Mhm, totally, and I've had a similar journey of either overdoing it and being like, "Okay, dogs are just like people," or then on the opposite, being so much on the, like, science-y perspective of it. "They're not, they're so different," and it's just funny, and now that I'm really studying the evolution of them together, it's we wouldn't be who we are today without dogs, and dogs wouldn't be who they are today without us, and they do get along with us so well because they're so similar from a biological perspective too of, like, their behaviors, like, they're very collaborative, they're very emotional, and those are the things that I think help them and help us empathize with them. And it's just really interesting. And so it is finding that balance of getting people to understand with concepts that they can relate to. And then also knowing they're not your child and they're not able to understand the words you're using. And maybe they don't have the ability to regulate themselves as well as an adult would. But even look at ourselves in the mirror. And are we emotionally regulated? Great when we have a better,
On my best days, sure,
ability.
but not
Right.
every day.
Exactly, I'm like, and we have in our brains just a better capacity for that than dogs do, and we still struggle. So it's I try and just have more realistic expectations, and I think my clients do a really good job of that as we start working together of understanding their dogs aren't gonna be perfect, there's no such thing, and also they're not gonna be perfect, and allowing them space to take messy action and just get away from that perfectionism, whether that's
Yeah.
within themselves or their dog's behavior.
I feel like through this conversation, I've got a good sort of boundary now of like where anthropomorphizing, which I probably didn't even say that right,
I know I can
can
never say it
be.
right either.
There's a lot of to our benefit and to our detriment. And I think if we're looking at understanding, I think that's a really beautiful place and a really good way to use the comparison. I think expectations is where we do not want to be playing
Yeah.
that comparison game because it's just they are missing the prefrontal cortex, right? There are things
Hmm.
that we have that they don't have that mean that they can't respond the same way. And then there's
Hmm.
also the fact that they are a different species, so they shouldn't necessarily respond the same way that we do. I think where
Right.
we can bridge the gap of understanding, it makes sense, where we can make the information meaningful to the humans. But I think
Hmm.
where we need to step away from that is the expectations. And that word is
Hmm.
just so important and maybe one of the most impactful ultimately like on their journey with their dog is the expectations because
Hmm.
it can just derail relationships and training plans so much.
100%. And I think it's really similar to our expectations, even in relationships with other people, of how much suffering we have when we expect people to do and be everything for us and be perfect. And we don't understand that they have their own experiences and things impacting how they're showing up today and their capacity for stress. And I think when you look at the world through this lens, it allows you to just connect, I think, on a deeper level and empathize with everyone else on this plane instead of looking at, you should do this, they should do that. I try to guide people on dropping the should. And it's this is where they're at. And here's all the things that I know of that can impact behavior. It's a big list. So let's figure out which ones we can either reduce, eliminate, change around, and track our own data. Is it working? And encourage people to be their own scientists because not there's not
Yes.
research proving everything at this point.
No, definitely not. And like you said, staying curious and then just empowering them. I think there's a lot within the way our industry is or was organized for a long time with a heavy emphasis on board and trains that really tells people that they're not enough,
Hmm.
that they could not possibly become the person that could help their dog through this. And that
Hmm.
is bullshit. I'm gonna say it
Hmm.
right there.
Yeah.
This is all like everything you're saying is about empowering people and them knowing that they are enough and they can
Mhm.
be enough for their dog. You just need to learn some things you don't know yet. You just need to maybe make some changes, but it's
Yeah.
all possible.
Exactly, yeah, and I always just like to remind people of that, that they're learning. I'm like, you're learning how to for the first time, like any skill or learning a new sport, and your dog's learning how to do this too with you. And you both have different experiences you're bringing to the table prior and a different capacity for learning. And so if it doesn't feel perfect, it's because it's not. And instead of looking at things as you're not doing a good enough job or how you're not a good dog owner or your dog's being stupid or stubborn. It's no, you're both just figuring it out and it's okay. And it's okay for it to not be perfect. Let's figure this out together. And I love
Absolutely.
helping them kind of work through that and decrease their own anxiety so they're not just sitting out there, I can't do anything right and internalizing that story too.
Yes, yes, I absolutely agree. And I just appreciate so much, like I said at the beginning, you being willing to be vulnerable and tell the hard stories because it is in these moments when we have to learn and figure out through the process, right? It doesn't always have to look perfect at first for it to be a valuable process. So I just really appreciate you sharing that story. Is there
Thank
anything
you.
else that you'd like the dog people out there to know about you or what you do?
Yeah, I think really at the end of the day, I emphasize more than training that like co-regulation piece and really just trying to get people to feel good about themselves and feel good about their dog while also recognizing that there are some really difficult dogs out there, no matter how regulated you are. There's safety risks involved and all of that. But I think historically the training industry has put too much emphasis on just the dog. And I really like to honestly put more emphasis on the person and not blaming them for anything, but really helping them feel better in their own lives and navigating stress and not being scared to sometimes actually waver out of my lane. I think often people are like, I'm just the dog trainer. This is my training. I'm like, what? Honestly, through the certifications I've gone through, it had taught me nothing about emotional regulation. And that's huge for what I do. That I do cross some lanes with ethics top of mind and curiosity and tracking our own data. And I'm not scared to do that anymore because I believe in the work that I do. I believe
Yeah.
in myself and I see that it has more good than harm. So it's something I want people to know is it goes beyond just positive reinforcement training and operant conditioning and classical conditioning. It's truly a lifestyle and
Yeah.
something I want my clients to know for life.
Yeah, we're here to coach the human with the very human emotions that come along with this.
Yeah, and I think it's unrealistic to expect them to get to a competency of a professional positive reinforcement trainer with their dog. Like, they
Yeah.
just learned how to do this. This takes years to get to work with advanced behavior issues. So
Yeah.
instead, how can we get them comfortable with the imperfections? How can we get them safe and help them be okay with their dog sometimes being triggered? And so I lean on that more than the dog that has the perfect end goal of the training, where it's like they can walk past everyone, no problem. I'm more of, can I get the person to feel confident handling when their dog can't do it? And they
Yeah.
just don't feel like overwhelmed to leave their house anymore. And they can have guests over and they can travel. Like, to me, that's a success story more than a perfect reactivity, start to
Yeah.
completion,
When we
you
hear
know.
from them, I know my dog is not going to never react again, but I also know I can handle it now. That's like,
Exactly.
yes.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes that means they're working with me for shorter periods of time, and some people want to do that longer, and I'm just okay with meeting them where they're at on the human end too.
You can connect with Ashley on Instagram at co_regulated canines. That's the letter K and the number 9. And you can find more information and a link to her work in the show notes. Thanks for joining us in the world of Dog Training Bites, where every challenge brings a lesson worth sinking our teeth into. See you next time. Dog Training Bites was created, produced, and edited by Mattison Simpson. You can connect with me on Instagram at Dog Training Bytes, that's BYTES, and at Freed by Training. For information on today's guest and resources for help with your dog or dog training education, visit www.dogtrainingbytes.stream. Looking for more? Listen to my other show, Unpacked, a clinical dog training podcast co-hosted by Sailor Jerry the dog trainer and produced by Straight Up Dog Talk LLC.